Shalom, I'm Shani Tarragon, and welcome to the podcast Secrets of the Scroll, Hidden Messages of Megillat Esther by Matan Mizrahi, powered by the Walter Foundation. In this series, we're going to explore textual allusions, literary messages that are hidden in the text of Megillat Esther, teaching us messages of not only the story itself, but allusions to the other 23 Sfarim of Tanakh. Please join me on this remarkable journey of learning through Tanakh through the eyes of Megillat Esther. I am particularly excited today as we're not only going to begin with the various allusions in Megillat Esther, this time to the beginning of Nevi'im, of Sefer Yehoshua in particular, but we're also going to change the format a little by learning some of these allusions b'chavruta. And it is my extreme honor, pleasure, and privilege to have as our first guest on this Megillat Esther podcast none other than my personal mentor and the founder and currently the president of Matan, Rabbanit Malke Bina.
Hi, Shani. It's such a great pleasure and honor to be here with you.
Oh, thank you. I was just talking to others as well about how I'm a little nervous even because here I have the zchut of learning b'chavruta with a phenomenal teacher and to share ideas of Torah together. So very much looking forward. So we're going to begin, or basically continue, with the allusions, secret allusions that Mordechai and Esther weave into Megillat Esther through alluding to what I love to call the secret language of Am Yisrael, which is Tanakh. And if we've seen, certainly, Chamisha Chumshei Torah appear as again, various textual associations that they consciously draw in the Megillah in order to teach us messages of leadership, of exile, of redemption, of Kedusha, of sovereignty in the land, then we're going to see how that continues even with Sefer Yehoshua. But at the same time, it is going to be a little strange that Yehoshua, a Sefer that begins in the context of conquest and national sovereignty, that should be a book that Mordechai and Esther turn to while they're in exile, while there isn't any national sovereignty, where they're almost, as we know, on the brink of extinction in Chutz La'aretz. So when I even mention Sefer Yehoshua to you in the context of Megillat Esther, what do you think? Do you make any associations?
I actually thought it's the polar opposite almost.
Isn't that interesting?
That Esther stays in Galut, unfortunately. Sadly, I once heard that Rav Soloveitchik said, and that's one of the reasons we don't say Hallel on Purim.
Exactly.
That Esther did not have the happiest, ending.
Right, meaning not just the Gemara that says Am Yisrael, but Esther herself stays in the king's palace.
Esther personally, and in Yehoshua, we're marching into Eretz Yisrael, and what could be better? And
so we would find it strange even that Mordechai and Esther would want to weave that story into somewhat even the tragic story of Megillat Esther. And yeah, we're going to find that they do. So because this is Chavruta, we're going to learn this together. I found about 7 different textual associations and analogies, and I would love to hear from you, Rabbanit Bina. What do you think about them? For example, in Megillat Esther, we hear in Perek Gimel Pasuk Aleph, Achar hadvarim ha'ile, Gidal hamelech Achashverosh et Haman. And the only other time that term appears, even though we've discussed the term Ha'ish Moshe Gadol, but Gidal as a verb, only one other time in all of Tanakh that it appears, which means that Mordechai and Esther consciously know that we're going to be thinking about this pasuk from Yehoshua, Bayamahu, Gidal Hashem et Yehoshua be'enei kol Yisrael. Why do you think Mordechai and Esther would incorporate the exact same terminology of Hashem's literally raising Yehoshua's status to Achashverosh raising Haman?
That's an excellent question. I was thinking about it a little bit, that Achashverosh raises the status of Haman and he becomes the second in charge, in command. and basically runs everything. Everything that he wants, he does. He just needs the king's ring, but it's basically Haman running everything. And Achashverosh doesn't even tell him, I'm really running things. It's me and not you, which Bemet, when Hashem raises the status of Yehoshua, makes him the leader of all of Am Yisrael to bring us into Eretz Yisrael, Hashem tells him, but chazak ve'amatz, and lead according to the rules of Torah, according to the way that I've taught you, according to the way that Moshe trained you. You can't do things yourself. It's Hashem raising you and raising you to the status to continue in the derech Hashem, and not like Achashverosh raises. So like telling us the farce of Achashverosh raising Haman.
Beautiful. I was also thinking that I think it's really illusory and very critical, meaning Mordechai and Esther know that we're going to think about that pasuk in Sefer Yehoshua, and they know that we're going to contrast it with, just as you said beautifully, that I wasn't even thinking that it's a promotion not only as a national political military leader, but really as a religious leader, someone who is also commanded, Vagita bo yomam balayla, he has to lo yamu sefer Torah mipicha umipi zaracha, that he also has to follow the Torah. And I think maybe they're also contrasting not just the type of leadership that you said, but even the time span of the leadership, the nature of that greatness, that ultimately, even though we hear about it in Perek Gimel, it's really in the 12th year of Achashverosh, Gidal HaMelech Achashverosh et Haman ben Hamdata. And then we hear that, again, by just the next few months, the entire story of Purim unfolds. And by the end of the year, basically, Haman and his 10 sons are hanging, which is also very interesting because Yehoshua is going to hang, and his greatness is one that lasts an entire generation, and really one can say for eternity. So they're perhaps even challenging us to explore the nature of power, as you said, not only the source of power, but what is true power? What is true greatness? Is it the ephemeral greatness of power and materialism and the king's signet ring? Or is it really the power of Torah and religious leadership that's given by HaKadosh Baruch Hu? How about even the way that Mordechai and Esther, or Mordechai in particular, is compared to Yehoshua, interestingly, through a phrase that also doesn't appear very often. At the end of Megillat Esther in Perek Tet, we hear, Ki Mordechai Hayudi, and is Ratzoi, the Rovachava, we hear at the very end, but even as he's elevated, Visham'o Holech B'chol HaMedinot, right? Literally, his reputation, his renown becomes known through all the different nations, which again rings in our ears from Sefer Yehoshua, Vayhi Hashem et Yehoshua, Vayhi Shamo B'chol Haaretz. These are basically two characters, again, Mordechai, this time not Haman, and Mordechai and Yehoshua, of whom we hear that their reputation is abound. What do you think Mordechai and Esther are trying to teach us through this allusion?
These are both leaders that changed the trajectory of Am Yisrael, and the people had to be with them. In Sefer Yehoshua, not only Hashem, but the people tell Yehoshua, Chazak v'amatz, we're going to be with you. We know what we're doing, and we're together with you. And this is somehow we understand, I think you'll elaborate, but both of these leaders were from Yosef, a certain element of leadership that they're able to bring to Am Yisrael. And Yehoshua in the beginning, the first one, and Mordechai somehow the end of the period of the Tanakh, as we're going to, Bezrat Hashem, in I don't know how many years later, you may know in more detail, come back to Eretz Yisrael, but it's a kind of almost beginning and an end of a period. And both times we need, somehow we don't have at this point Malchut Beit David, but we need from Yosef, a leader such as Yehoshua or a leader such as Mordechai, whose renown, whose reputation, whose leadership is able to bring all of Am Yisrael together for the Geula, for the Yeshua.
Beautiful, beautiful. You're right. I was going to get to it at the end, but I love that you already brought this in now, which is remarkable that these two leaders have so many parallels, and they're both descendants of Rachel Imenu. Right? Ish Yehudi haya b'Shushan habira, Ushmor Mordechai ben Yair ben Shimri ben Kish, Ish Yemini, and he's from Binyamin, and Yehoshua from Ephraim. And generally, we don't find these leaders. We're going to discuss actually in Sefer Shoftim, so stay tuned for tomorrow. Be'ezrat Hashem, we'll discuss the nature of Yehuda's leadership versus Ephraim's leadership or Yosef's leadership. And we discuss this a little in allusions to Sefer Breshit, but definitely remarkable how Mordechai himself is saying, I'm a little bit like Yehoshua, that I'm that leader from Bnei Rachel who's going to, like Yehoshua, bring you through this transition, as you said, bring you through this leadership. And even though, and in terms of years, if Yehoshua is around 1250 BCE and this story we said is around 480 BCE, then really it is a difference of over 800 years between them. And Mordechai is saying we're in another stage now of transition where we're the second-class citizens, but especially if this is during the time of Shivat Zion, maybe he does want to allude to the fact that in order for us to eventually have the restoration of Malchut Yehuda, we have to go through Malchut Bnei Rachel. We have to go through Yehoshua, and now we need this leadership of Mordechai and Esther also as a transition. I think it's also interesting, back to the Shamot, to their reputation, that in Yehoshua's case, it says that Hashem is responsible for that reputation. Whereas in Mordechai's case, again, we just find by Hishamo B'chol HaMedinot, maybe what Mordechai and Esther are also trying to allude to in this time of censorship, where they really feel, as evidence in all of Am Yisrael, that Hashem's presence and even national cognizance of Hashem is rather vague and limited. Maybe they're alluding to the fact, who's really behind Mordechai's greatness? Really Hashem.
Right. No, Hashem, who isn't mentioned, of course, in the Megillah. But also I was thinking, what about the Medinot?
Wow.
Because there, we're all in Eretz Yisrael. It's one Medina.
Wow. That is beautiful.
And here we're talking about they're in Galut, so it's in the Mea Esrim V'Sheva, right, Medinot. That there it's Medinot. And I think in Yehoshua it's more in Eretz Yisrael.
B'chol ha'aretz. Wow, Rabbanit Bina, I love that. See, that's why it's so worthwhile to learn B'chavruta.
Because there it's
beautiful. Exactly. So Yehoshua is the leader in an entire sovereign, meaning they're also contrasting and saying, we both are great renown, but Yehoshua's is national, even unity, and he has a national leadership position. And Mordechai, he's known in Shushan, B'chol HaMedinot, right? And then they know him dispersed really throughout all the other states. But it's not as strong. It's not as universally, or one can even say, as nationally present.
Right. It's a little bit here and a little bit there, as unfortunately it still is today. But in many places. But we also have, Baruch Hashem, today, we're here in Eretz Yisrael as well. So we have the combination of Yehoshua and Mordechai.
Beautiful, beautiful. I was going to say, I'd like to think that we're more in a Yehoshua state.
Right.
But you're right, we still have.
We can't forget everyone who's everywhere and listening to the podcast. We're all together. Yes. And we'll get here. But right, it's Medinot.
That's right. And Hashem plays a role in that also. I think that's beautiful. Okay, here's another one. How about in Yehoshua, we hear time and time again in Perek Chaf Gimel and Perek Chaf Aleph and Perek Yud, again, we hear that there's a tremendous fear that is rampant through the land as Am Yisrael continue to conquer the land. And the term that's used is Lo Yityatzev Ish Lifnechem, that no one stands. And this we know, as you mentioned, even from the very beginning when Hashem assures Yehoshua Chazak ve'ematz, no one's going to stand before him. And sure enough, you can imagine as he divides up the mountainous range of Eretz Yisrael and then conquers the southern alliance, the northern alliance, at some point, no one stands in front of him. Already in Perek Yud, we hear this term, which definitely rings, especially because the Mesorah, the tradition is that we read this twice. V'ish lamad bifneihem ki nafal pachtam al kol ha'amim. So clearly, Mordechai and Esther, ish lo amad lifneihem, they're bringing us back to, again, Yehoshua, lo yityatzev ish lifneichem. telling us that at the time that the second letters go out, and now Jews are allowed to defend themselves and fight with those Persians who are going to be so enraged or full of anti-Semitism that they're going to go and attack the Jewish people anyway. Still we hear, Ish lo amad lifnehem. Why do you think we borrow again from the vocabulary of Sefer Yehoshua?
I was trying to think, even though the situation isn't ideal, and many Jews still remain in Persia and the other Medinot, I think Mordechai and Esther maybe want to feel a certain strength. They're kind of longing to have that strength of Yehoshua and trying to muster as much courage and bravery as they can from Yehoshua for the times that aren't fully ideal.
I think that's remarkable. My first thought was, okay, again, it's a way of bringing us back to HaKadosh Baruch Hu's behind the scenes. Just as Hashem was standing with Yehoshua ben Nun against his adversaries, so too Mordechai and Esther are alluding to that. Don't worry, Hashem is the one making sure that all of our enemies are going to be quelled and they're going to be gripped with fear. But I love what you just said. I think that Mordechai and Esther are saying that Hashem is with us, even in Chutz La'aretz, as we stand against our enemies, and we have to stand just as strong as Jews and with Jewish identity as we do in Eretz Yisrael with national identity. We have to stand outside of Eretz Yisrael. B'chol ha-medinot, we have to stand also. It's okay. Ish lo amad lifnehem. That they recognize not only that Hashem is going to help us again stand firm, it's almost their way of invigorating us and saying, you can stand firm as Jewish people in Chutz La'aretz as well.
As long as we do have Eretz Yisrael.
As we, Yafeh Ma'od, and during his time they did. So maybe that's really it. He's saying, if you're on the right side, the ethical side, the moral side, you're on the Eretz Yisrael side, you're standing up with your correct national religious values and identity, then even in Chutz La'aretz, Hashem is going to protect you.
Sometimes that's how it has to play out, and you have to be in Chutz La'aretz. But
that's right.
To be there with a certain strength and pride of being Jewish and with national and sovereign identity of Eretz Yisrael is there for me when I'll be able to come, Bezrat Hashem.
Beautiful. And maybe that really is, even as you're talking, I'm thinking maybe that really is what they're trying to say, because through so many stories of Galut and through so many, literally hundreds of years of Jewish history, we know that we've literally, I would say, fallen in almost in cowardice, right? We really have not seen that, okay, Ish lo amad lifnehem, everyone stands up against us.
And think of the Holocaust.
That's exactly what I'm thinking. And Mordechai and Esther are saying, now that we're returning to Tzion, we're back. Ish lo amad lifnehem. This is what affords us strength, that we have, even if we're not there, the fact that we have Medinat Yisrael, the fact that we have Eretz Yisrael during the time of Mordechai and Esther, we can now return. That should give you that power from Sefer Yehoshua to know that other nations can't really attack you anymore. They can't, because you have that refuge and because you have that national identity. Rabbanit Bina, that's beautiful. Okay, now we get
Shani,
to one.
You're leading and very special.
But I love the ideas.
I can add a bit of thoughts here and there.
Wow, thank you. This is really, again, mikom malamdai hiskalti, bemet. And how about the term that definitely resounds time and time again at the ends of Megillat Esther, ubabiza lo shalchu et yadam. You hear it over and over again. And we mentioned in an earlier podcast that there is an economic incentive in Haman suggesting to the king that he annihilate this machan mufuzar muforad bein ha'amim, so that this way all the spoils will enter the treasury. And we don't hear that Haman really gives any money to the treasury. We actually hear that the king initially gives him a deposit of money to help start his final solution, but that when it comes to the Yehudim, Uvabiza lo shalchu et yadam. When we end up fighting against the Persians, we really don't touch it. We don't take the spoils for ourselves. Everything will go to the king's treasury, so much so that Achashverosh calls Esther in and says, no, how many people were killed? It seems that I want more dead Persians just so that I can bring more money into the government, into the treasury. So when we hear this, Uvabiza lo shalchu et yadam, it reminds us of another time that we were told that we're not allowed to take from the spoils of war, particularly Achan. Excellent. The war of Yehoshua against Yericho. Your Yericho Cherem, right? We're not allowed to take because we have to recognize that it's really Hashem's war. And it's Hashem's, and therefore the spoils go to Hashem. They don't go to us. So why do you think? Again, and Achan, as you said, Achan unfortunately takes the spoils and thereby undermines the attribution of the conquest to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. So why do you think Mordechai and Esther go to an extreme even in making sure that we know, don't worry, even when we fought really the battles of Hamelach HaChashverosh that he allowed us to fight in self-defense, even then we didn't take of the spoils. Why would they want to emphasize that the war against the Persians is like the war of Yericho?
What I've been thinking, it's a little bit different than Yehoshua, because in Yehoshua, it's Hashem telling us, and it's that we should realize that Eretz Yisrael is given to us by Hashem, and that if Hashem says not to take from the spoils, we don't take. It's controlled by Hashem. I think here, living in Galut, it wasn't so much of Hashem, it was that we wanted to be careful. We wanted to be careful. And I think the question seems to be a little bigger than the answer, but it seems Hashem's name not being there, that Esther and Mordechai didn't want to provoke Achashverosh and give credit to another, to our HaKadosh Baruch Hu, to our King, Melech Malke Bina, right? So we don't even mention Hashem's name, and we're on tippy toes. We're very careful, and also in the Bizah. We don't want to be accused. We don't want to be accused of wrongdoing. We're very careful in how we have to behave. It's something of human, as opposed to that we're humanly, Esther and Mordechai want to be super careful. Whereas in Achan, with the whole story it was Hashem telling, right? I think it wasn't that it didn't come from Yehoshua, right? It came from Hashem telling Yehoshua, right? It was attributed to Hashem.
Yes.
Whatever it was something God-oriented. Even if Yehoshua said it, it's because Hashem is doing it. And there, it's more because of fear of Achashverosh, fear of what the Goyim would say, not so much fear of Hashem. I mean, we want to be moral, we want to do the right thing, but I don't think that was the main factor. I think they were very careful not to anger the authorities.
So it's so interesting because you're really honing in on a theme that continuously really appears in all these subtle messages, which is the name of Hashem absent because literally they're in exile and they want to show how Hashem is absent and Hashem is hidden in exile? Or is it really, just as you mentioned, that they can't mention Shem Hashem because this book is going to be censored, and especially in a pagan Persian society, when the king was viewed as a demigod, you certainly can't bring in your own deity, your own power into the story, and therefore Mordechai and Esther literally weave godly stories and a lot of Sefer Vayikra and the Kedusha, again, as if Esther is standing, and that's why Chazal tell us every time that they say HaMelech, they're really referring to Melech Malke Hamlachim. So again, is it a conscious message of censorship, or is it that they're also alluding and saying you have to look for God a little harder here in exile? And then back to what you were saying, but just know that the same people who perhaps didn't recognize Hashem and Hashem's commands. Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai and his students argue over how assimilated, the Jews were, Shenehenu misudato shaloto rasha, were they actually worshiping Avodah Zarah, whatever the case may be. By the end of the story, perhaps that's why Mordechai and Esther bring us back to Yehoshua and the Cherem really for God. You know that this is all God's. Ubabiza lo shalchu et yadam, meaning not just as covenantal discipline, which I think is also part of it, that showing that even in Chutz La'aretz, even without Yehoshua mentioning, in the name of God, any divine commands, that look at these people who are so disciplined and won't touch anything that's not there. The moral. They are not going to be like Achan, which is a way of showing that they appreciate that this war is not really Achashverosh's war. It's really HaKadosh Baruch Hu's war. And if it's Hashem's war, then they don't want to take the spoils of the war. That they really do, even on their own. And I think that's what Megillat Esther and that's what Mordechai and Esther are trying to tell us, that the people do see that Hashem is there even in exile, and therefore we have to respond in kind. We can't take of God's war. We know that this is God's war. And I think that this is very relevant for today's time when people in the streets of New York stand up, or in England or Australia, they stand up for Jewish identity, to realize that it's not just a powerful, independent, or even national voice. It really is a religious voice going back to Yehoshua, that we have to recognize that we're not just fighting for ourselves and for our own autonomy and self-realization. We're fighting for HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And therefore, God is going to fight these wars with us.
I mean, many times it's actually even more difficult. I was thinking to myself, you have a leader like Yehoshua, and you have a leader like Mordechai.
That's right.
That Mordechai, I think there was a lot of kind of split personality and what to think and how to go about it. Whereas Yehoshua, even though it wasn't, Am Yisrael's not an easy nation to lead, but I think it was more straightforward, and he had the one goal there, and HaKadosh Baruch Hu was out there, it was more seen with the Nevuah, so which it was more available. So it was like there was a certain advantage there. But Mordechai and Esther wanted that advantage, wanted that call of Hashem, wanted that nevuah from the time of Yehoshua.
Beautiful.
And therefore wanted to take all these different linguistic and ideas from Yehoshua to give strength to their generation.
Beautiful, beautiful. And I think that, just as you said, it's the strength of the Malchut of Bnei Rachel, that they're alluding to, the strength of Hashem being there in this transition time, the strength of Hashem fighting their wars for them, even when they're outside of the borders of Eretz Yisrael. I think it's also, there's another beautiful parallel, or really two more, if we can explore how when Rachav in Sefer Yehoshua describes how the Canaanim are gripped with fear. Again, so she speaks about really the Eimah, similar to, again, Ish lo amad lefnechem, but she speaks about the Eimah, and Esther also speaks about this fear spreading. And I think maybe they're alluding to the same idea, that without even the theological signals and miracles of Kriyat Yamsuf and the miraculous wars against Sichon and Og that Rachav is exposed to and Rachav hears, that Esther says, even without these overt miracles, we know that there's fear. We know that people are afraid of us, even when they don't see miracles. That there's a theological basis, as you were saying, for, I should hope, even righteous Gentiles who
right. I just want to interject. That's also, there's a woman at the beginning
Beautiful.
And the end.
Yes, we don't ignore
right?
that.
Rachav had
Beautiful.
to be there because the woman has a part always. And Esther, but go ahead, Shani.
Excellent. So it's definitely Esther's voice, beautiful. But even, and no, don't worry, we definitely pay attention. We did this with Sefer Shemot to make sure that we see the parallels between Esther, the Bat, and the Bayit, and all the women in Sefer Shemot as well, the Banot of Yisrael, because it's very true that they definitely want to show you in every generation, women are behind the stories of victory and women are behind the redemption, 100%. But they also both of them note that there is a fear that's falling upon the nations. Rachav, who explicitly says that everyone knows that this is your God. Esther, who, as you mentioned, cannot explicitly say it, but through alluding to Rachav's words, basically is telling us this is a direct allusion to what Rachav said.
Whispering it.
Again, through the text of Megillat Esther. which is beautiful, which I think is a nice way to even wrap up the Tanakh allusions that we've mentioned of also the Hashem who elevates leaders, Hashem who fights our wars, Hashem who makes Yehoshua great in Sefer Yehoshua, and all of these hidden messages of Esther that, yes, when it looks like Achashverosh is the one to promote, it's really not. It's really Hashem. It looks like, again, that the spear falls on the people. No, it's really Hashem behind the scenes. And by bringing us back to Yehoshua, to a time where it was so manifest, they're almost shaking us up and saying, don't you see that this is Yehoshua in disguise? For many who don't know, and Rabbanit Bina is not only a masterful teacher of Tanakh, but also of Torah Sheba'al Peh. So this is perfect, Rabbanit Bina, because we find that Chazal note these allusions very, very clearly. For all those who are somewhat skeptical, are these allusions really here? So firstly, you can check up on each one of them, and there are Marim Mekomot, there are sources for each one of these podcasts. So definitely take a look and you'll see them on your own. But Chazal saw them, as we know, by teaching us when they actually canonized not only Megillat Esther, but as Esther also said, Kiv'uni L'Dorot, established Purim as a holiday. So also close to 500 years after the story takes place, when Chazal established Purim as a holiday in Eretz Yisrael, they actually transform the holiday as it's described in Megillat Esther, initially as Mordechai enacted, as a 2-day holiday celebrated on Yudalid and on Tetvav, both by the people in Shushan and by all the different people in the periphery. How do Chazal change it? They say it's going to be
not only Persia, but every city from the time that had a wall from the time of Yehoshua ben Nun.
Which is so strange. They say, okay, we're in Eretz Yisrael, so of course we can only have 1 day of Yontif. So it's going to be a 1-day Yontif because 2 days is anathema, as Rav Soloveitchik said, to Eretz Yisrael. So we're going to transform it into an Eretz Yisrael holiday. Instead of 2 days, we'll have, Yom Tov Sheni Shagaliot. It will be 2 separate days, depending on where you live. Not Shushan and the periphery, but rather anyone who lives everywhere. You'll celebrate like everyone outside of Shushan did on the 14th. And then if you live in a city that was surrounded by a wall from the time of Yehoshua ben Nun, then you'll celebrate like the people of Shushan initially did, which was on the 15th, which is so strange. To celebrate a holiday 500 years after the event happens, to enact it based on a phenomenon of 1,300 years earlier. Why do you think they did that? Why did they say that when you celebrate Purim, Chazal want us to know that this has something to do with Sefer Yehoshua?
And I think that Chazal went in the way of Esther and Mordechai when they said Ad Chatzi HaMalchut. Esther, actually, right? Who said Ad Chatzi HaMalchut. And that because the king somehow, the king said it to Esther, Achashverosh said it to Esther, knowing that Esther may want that Malchut and maybe alluding to the Malchut of Beit David, Malchut of going back to Eretz Yisrael.
Beautiful.
And just as Esther wanted Yerushalayim, the Makom of the Malchut, the Makom of the Beit HaMikdash, the Makom of David, David. So also Chazal, somehow I think definitely one of the main cities that celebrates on the 15th, Purim on the 15th, is Yerushalayim.
Yes, you would know that living within the Chamot of Yerushalayim.
So that definitely was, they didn't want to maybe say Yerushalayim outright, because not only Yerushalayim, because we have, at Persia, I don't even know exactly what happened in Persia, but they wanted Yerushalayim to be included, just as somehow Esther was thinking about Yerushalayim.
Beautiful. So we definitely are going to see numerous solutions. Even Shushan Habira, the only other city in Tanakh that's called Habira, is Yerushalayim. I think that even beyond telling us that Yerushalayim plays a role here, Laniyut Dati, I think Chazal were telling us when you celebrate this holiday, which is about the salvation of Jews in Chutz La'aretz, you have to remember that what we really are celebrating is the restoration of sovereignty in Eretz Yisrael. That they want to tell us, okay, On the 14th, you're going to celebrate the way that they did in Persia. But if you celebrate the 14th and the 15th, like they did in Persia everywhere, then you're really celebrating. It's like celebrating July 4th in Israel. You're celebrating something that happened to Jews in Chutz La'aretz by saying, no, the 14th is your way of remembering this Nes Nistar, Hashem saving majority of the Jews throughout the lands. And on the 15th, when the people of Shushan initially celebrated, don't let that get to your head. Don't think that that's what we're really celebrating, the restoration of Malchut Yisrael in Chutz La'aretz. I think what they're telling we're telling us and really telling Esther, is Esther, you yourself wrote Megillat Esther with allusions to Sefer Yehoshua. You yourself recognize that really we should appreciate that this is a transition, that this is an opportunity, that this is really not the ideal. It's based off of Sefer Yehoshua, but you're alluding to the fact that, halavai, if we can really celebrate the restoration of autonomy and Jewish identity in Eretz Yisrael. So they take literally an Independence Day, right? Almost a day of Chutz La'aretz, and they transform it to Yom Ha'atzmaut. They transform it to Am Yisrael celebrating the last time that we had full sovereignty, which was in Eretz Yisrael, which was 1,300 years earlier in the time of Yehoshua ben Nun. And therefore Chazal are taking the illusion of Mordechai and Esther and actually codifying this illusion, everything that we've said over the past little while, they're codifying it as halacha. And they're saying, this is the message. Don't you realize that the celebration of Purim really is about helping us recognize Hashem's support in our lives, Hashem battling our battles, Hashem being the one to really promote what true power is. And albeit you're going to see that manifest in Eretz Yisrael, and you're going to see how Hashem fights those wars of 2,000 plus years of Galut, but to realize that what you really want to celebrate is Yom Ha'atzmaut in Eretz Yisrael, is to really celebrate.
In a sense, as much as Mordechai and Esther were able to accomplish, in a sense, they were jealous of Yehoshua, Chazal are telling us, and they wanted to be able to be there along with Yehoshua and at least elevate that status of Am Yisrael coming back to Eretz Yisrael.
Beautiful. And that's the transformation. That's the beauty of halacha, to really redefine and requalify, again, based on Torah Shebechtav, which is so significant that Megillat Esther really is a transition. And Chazal say, okay, we're going to take that message of almost the Sefer Yehoshua want to be, Esther and Mordechai, we know that that's how you're writing the Sefer. And don't worry, Kivuni Lidorot, Esther, we will establish your holiday. And you know what we're going to do? We're going to establish your holiday of Purim with a little bit of Yehoshua ben Nun terminology, halacha, and reality as well.
And Yerushalayim.
And Yerushalayim, yes, of course. So hopefully when we look at Megillat Esther, not only will we appreciate these beautiful theological messages and HaKadosh Baruch Hu's involvement in Chutz La'aretz really is almost a prelude to coming to Eretz Yisrael, but definitely when we celebrate Purim this year, we'll celebrate it as another Yom Ha'atzmaut with all the Jews coming from Persia, from Iran, from all over the diaspora. Ezrat Hashem could really be. Yes, indeed.
Thank you for joining us for Secrets of the Scroll with Rabbanit Shani Targin. This series is presented by Matan and World Mizrahi and powered by Walder Foundation. We hope today's conversation inspired you, sparked new ideas, and deepened your connection to the text and its meaning. If you enjoyed this episode, please take a moment to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and share it with your friends or family who would appreciate these conversations. Your support helps us continue bringing thoughtful, meaningful Torah to the wider audience. We look forward to learning together again soon. See you in the next episode of Secrets of the Scroll with Rabbanit Shani Targin.